Welcome. My name is Arjon Dunnewind. I'm the director of IMPAKT, and I have the privilege of being your host and moderator tonight. I've got good and bad news. Usually that's something very ominous when someone starts an announcement like that, but it's not that bad. The bad news, unfortunately, is that Vladan Joler had important obligations in the US, and he's not with us here, not live, not in this hall. But the good news is that he will be with us tonight, remote, over the internet. And the way we organized tonight's presentation is that we'll start with a very nice video that Vladan made for us. Tonight's event is called New Extractivism, and it's also the title of a video that Vladan made. But especially for us, he added short personal notes and explanations to this video. Some of you might know the New Extractivism video. It's not that old. For many of you, it will be a new video. And I saw it earlier today, and I found it very inspiring and excellent, very personal introduction to his own thoughts and this construction that he's going to present with us tonight, the New Extractivism. I'll read a little bit of the bio of Vladan Joler for you, for those of you who don't know who Vladan is. Vladan Joler is an academic, researcher and artist whose work blends data investigation, counter-cartography, investigative journalism, writing, data visualization, critical design, and numerous other disciplines. He explores and visualizes different technical and social aspects of algorithmic transparency, digital labor exploitation, invisible infrastructures, and many other contemporary phenomena in the intersection between technology and society. In 2018, in cooperation with Kate Crawford, he published Anatomy of an AI System, a large-scale map and long-form essay investigation investigating the human labor, data, and planetary resources required to build and operate an Amazon Echo device. And some of you might know the work. It's a beautiful work. If you don't know it, I can only recommend it to check it out. A previous study of his, entitled Facebook Algorithmic Factory, and he will refer to it in his presentation tonight, included deep forensic investigation and visual mapping of the algorithmic processes and forms of exploitation behind the largest social network, Facebook, of course. Other studies that he authored, published in recent years by the independent research collective ShareLab, included research on information warfare, metadata analysis, browsing history exploitation, surveillance, and internet architecture. The bio goes on. I'll not read all of it, but the last paragraph is maybe also interesting. Joler's work has been profiled and covered in many international media, such as BBC, CNN, Wired, The Independent, The Times, Wallpaper, Le Figaro, The Verge, Fast Company, Arch, Art Forum, Neural, Le Jour, We Make Money Not Art, and many others. So far his bio. The video that we're going to watch now, with his inserts in it, is about 40 minutes long. I found it very thought-provoking and inspiring. I hope you also enjoy it. And after 40 minutes, Vladan will be with us. We have this device. It's a catch mic, also called crouton. And whoever has any questions, and I really ask and invite you to think of questions during the presentations. I've got millions, but of course it's much better and nicer if you are the ones asking him the questions. So after we're done, I will open the interview with him. We'll have a Q&A, I'll open the floor. We're going to throw this catch mic to you, and we hope you're going to join us in the dialogue that we hope to have with Vladan Joler. But now, first, let's have a watch, and let's look at his video, New Extractivism, with his personal explanations in it. Thanks a lot.
Good evening. It's really a great pleasure to be in this a bit weird way with you tonight at IMPAKT Festival. What I'm going to show you, it's called New Extractivism. So it's my latest video. It's basically some kind of follow-up on many other research and maps that I was doing in the past. So, for example, 3 or 5 years ago, I was doing some kind of investigation of different kinds of invisible layers behind infrastructure that we are using. So we started with investigations of networks, internet service providers, and then we were like going deeper and deeper. And one of the first big maps I did was a map of Facebook algorithms, and it was called Facebook Algorithmic Factory. And so after that, we did really big investigation into some kind of extended anatomy of one device, and that device is Amazon Echo device. And there we explored this kind of like, again, different layers of materiality of this device and networks, but also extended in a way into this like invisible planetary scale systems that are behind devices that we use. So we started with elements, we started with earth and different metals, and then followed this story into this kind of extended anatomy of devices. And basically when I was doing that, in the beginning I was like mostly thinking that different kinds of like data investigations and different kinds of like visualization can give me an answer of this, like how this invisible world of power is basically working. But more and more I was like going deep into those extended anatomies. I realized that okay, maybe those investigations and data and all of this can give me like idea of how those systems are interconnected and how those systems are working. But in a way, in order to give a meaning to that, to understand like what are really implications, what is the meaning of all of those things, I understood that it's not about those kind of technical aspects of all of this. It's more about like if I want to understand why art and philosophy and those kind of like critical media theory is basically giving me some kind of understanding of those processes. And this is why I started to pay much more attention on that, and started to read and try to understand those systems from those angles. And this, what we are going to see now in this video, it's basically some kind of like a diary of all of those like let's say philosophical ideas and concepts that I was like really enjoying reading and thinking about, and I combine all of this into one, some kind of assemblage of different concepts and allegories. So we will start with that, and I will stop after each chapter. I will stop and try to explain you like a bit more, because I understood when I finished this video that it's maybe a bit too much, and in a way like the concentration of different kinds of like ideas and philosophical concepts embedded in this video, it's maybe too much, and this is why maybe this kind of like parallel explanation is a good idea. So let's start. It's going to be some kind of like roller coaster of different dense ideas, but I will try to make it more understandable.
New Extractivism, an assemblage of concepts and allegories. The word assemblage is usually understood as a collection or gathering of things or people, a machine or object made of pieces fitted together, or a work of art made by grouping together found or unrelated objects. This map and accompanying footnotes are precisely that. One big messy assemblage of different concepts and ideas, assembled into one semi-coherent picture, or let us say a map, a worldview. 1. Gravity. Like Einstein's theory of relativity, massive objects curve the space and time of the topography of the internet, proportionally to their weight, defined by the number of their users and content. So we can think of massive monopolies and conglomerates such as Google and Facebook as enormous black holes that, with their gravity, create a field so intense that it attracts and swallows the content and users.
So this is the first allegory that we are seeing here, and I was like, I fell in love with this idea of let's say gravity and internet from the work of like French artist Louis Drew, and so I really like this idea that you know, we first try to think about the internet as a space, you know, as some kind of like, and then to try to combine this, that all of those like websites or platforms or whatever we speak about, they have a certain gravity. And then basically they are bending time and space in the same way, like in this kind of Einstein's theory of relativity. And in a way, this is something that I saw even before in some of like data investigations that I was doing, because like when for example we were analyzing the browsing histories, we were able to see those like black holes. We are able to see those like points of gravity, because how we are using internet, it's we are always like going from one to another of those like big gravities, you know, like we are always, we as a human beings, we are, you know, like we have like certain patterns of behavior, so we are always checking this and checking that, and those like big platforms are we can think about them as a strong gravitational points.
2. Forces. Many other potential vectors and social forces contribute to that gravitational force. The fear of social isolation, economic and professional insecurity, unrealistic expectations of efficiency and productivity in the adapt or die environment, tailored addictions, depression and anxieties. These are just some of the other vectors that constitute social forces that keep us, with or without our wish, attached to those platforms.
So here, you know, like, so for example, in the work of Louise Drew, she's counting this, like she's like explaining that those like gravities are, you know, like related to number of users, you know. So we can say if there is like 1 billion people using, I don't know, Facebook or whatever, so the gravity of those like platforms is stronger, and we are like leaning toward those places. But for me, I wanted to somehow to extend those ideas, so to say maybe it's not just about like number of users, maybe it also there is some other factors, basically vectors, that are constituting this gravity force. So because like it's not just number of users, but also like how those platforms are using different tricks to get us like attached to them. So they're like some of them are tailored to be addictive. Some of them, the social price, for example, of not being part of those platforms, it's also some kind of one vector that is like attaching us, like keeping us down, attached to those places.
The social cost of opting out has become so high that opting out is essentially a fantasy.
So, and that moment, that thing is like really important for me. It's like, you know, like there is a moment in which we can say like, you know, like none of us need to use those platforms. Nobody is like pushing us. But basically, if we are not participating in those places, there is a price of not doing that. So this is kind of like this social price. And then here I wanted to draw this, like, you know, if you saw in the few moments before, it's this kind of like invisible line that is like this kind of like a moment in which this social price is getting too big, in the sense of like and we are drowning in that water.
3. Black holes. Our imaginary hero is swimming against one of those platforms' gravitational force. As they glide towards the singularity defined by the mass of these giants, users and content pass beyond the event horizon, the imaginary boundary in time and space, beyond which there is no return to the outer part of this universe. The event horizon defines the line after which the social and economic price of leaving those platforms is becoming too high.
So this is this moment, and here I'm using another metaphor or allegory. It's basically, if this gravity is too strong, then we are seeing some kind of black holes, you know, and here we are seeing some person who is basically trying to let's say swim against this force that is putting him inside of this black hole. And then there is this beautiful another idea of like this kind of point of no return, and this point of no return, it's also like not visible, you know, like when we are crossing this point, we are not aware that this point exists at all, but after this point it's almost impossible to go out of it. There is another metaphor that is not like included in this video, and this is something that I in some discussion with another people, there is this kind of like another idea of this kind of velocity speed. For example, when you are like trying to escape gravity, then you basically need to spend a lot of energy in order to escape this gravity, but this velocity speed and it's something like it gives us some hope that even like, you know, like amount of energy that we need to use in order to escape is big. It is possible at the end, no?
No matter how fast they try to swim now, the stream will pull them towards the center of the black hole. Without even noticing, this story's actor is now falling towards the hole into a new allegory, the cave. 4. Allegory of the cave. What takes place at the bottom of this metaphorical black hole can be described through Plato's allegory of the cave. Plato describes a group of people who spend their entire life chained to cave walls looking at a blank wall. These people are watching the shadows of real objects projected on this wall, giving them names and meanings. In our story, the script and directing of this performance of shadows are entrusted to human algorithmic machines that regulate, filter, censor and moderate the projected content on the walls of the cave.
So as you see, now we're entering into the third allegory. So this is like really famous one. So it's an allegory of the cave from Plato, and I had a lot of fun thinking about this one. And basically, we fell down through this like black hole, and we are in our own cave, and let's cage or however we can call that. And so in original one, original allegory, what we have, it's a situation that like people are you know, there being chained to the it's like bottom of the cave. So they are seeing some kind of projection on the wall, and this projection in original allegory is projected by another people who are outside of the cave, and then they play with some kind of puppets and some kind of objects, and people who are inside of the cave who never went out before. So these kind of projections on the wall are basically only thing that they see, and that so they are like sitting there and doing some kind of interpretation of those like theaters of shadows, and giving those shadows some kind of meanings and all. And for me, this was like really powerful allegory, especially in the case because this work was like made during the COVID time, and then, you know, those kind of walls and those caves were like even stronger than before, because like what we were like had in that period, we were like all our perception of the world was basically most of the time just projection on those screens, and so we were like seeing the reality through those like data interpretation of number of COVID cases, or seeing news, seeing reality outside of our caves just through those screens. And then like the important point there was, and it still is, it's like who is like in original allegory, so you have some people there, but here for me the question was like who is like director of this play, this reality show that we are seeing through those screens. And in this case I like to think that like real director is basically not a human being, but all of those like images and news and everything is being basically moderated and directed by different kinds of algorithms or statistical processes.
The existing elements and content that exist outside this cave and horizon of events create an information flow, a theater of shadows. 5. Walls. The cave and tower walls are constructed of multiple opaque layers and built mostly by ghost work or invisible labor. The bricks of this structure are made of black boxes, closed code and hardware, glued together with the invisible network infrastructure.
So this is like some kind of homage to what I was like basically doing for years before. It was trying to find a way how to see through those different layers, so like the behind device, so the networks, the data centers, the algorithms behind, the human labor behind. So here I'm representing all of those like invisible layers as some kind of like layers of those walls that are not allowing us to see the world behind.
They are covered with layers of corporate secrets, patents and copyrights. 6. The interface. Interfaces are framing and structuring the projected algorithmic spectacle of images. Even though they are a direct manifestation of rules, regulations and taxonomies, they successfully obscure what is hidden beneath them. They define directly or indirectly what we can or cannot do. They are both tools and discursive frames. They are instituted as an order of discourse and embodiment of the disciplined power of the platform.
So another really important segment for me, it's basically this interface that we are seeing, because this interface, it really defines what we can do or what we cannot do. It defines like how we see the world, it defines like how we understand the world, and it basically defines like the rules of the game, like, so for example, if we think about like Twitter or Facebook or whatever, like how this interface looks like, it defines like what we are doing and what is the name of the game. So the name of the game, it's the number of likes or number of shares or whatever. So it's the role of interface, it's like super important in this whole setup.
This cave is not only a prison cell, but it carries out the function of a factory hall and a resource extraction apparatus.
This triangle, it's again super important for me. So it's coming back also to anatomy of an AI system. When the whole map was basically, even if it's not so visible maybe on the first hand, it's like those triangles are the main symbols that I'm using to explain this structure, and so this triangle, it's made of like resource, labor, and product. And this is something that this is the core, one of the core questions that I'm asking there. It's like okay, in this like invisible factory that we are investigating here, and it's basically moderating our lives. And so what is this like relation between resources, labor, and product? And so in that sense, this cave that we are in is again within this triangle.
Prisoner performs their threefold function as a worker, a resource, and a product. 7. Shadows and capture agents. The spectacle of a constant flow of information projected through the interface creates a digital shadow on the opposite wall of the cave. The projected digital shadow on the wall is a resource field where thousands of capture agents, tentacles of the rhizomatic surveillance complex, extract information. Every movement or emotional reaction is being recorded continuously. These capture agents can take many forms and sizes. From the tiny pieces of code, crawlers that wander the web, over the sensors catching heartbeats and surveillance cameras capturing our faces, to the complex network of satellites orbiting Earth. They can see our shadows through a full range of the electromagnetic spectrum. They can be invisible or massive like a 500 meters wide radio telescope. The process of quantification is reaching into the human affective, cognitive and physical worlds. Every segment of our existence reflected on our digital shadows can be seen as a form of direct or indirect labor producing data as a behavioral surplus. When we breathe, walk, or sleep, every single emotion that we feel, our attention, our body temperature, or diseases that we have, everything can produce a behavioral surplus if being captured by surveillance apparatus. In that sense, even our bare existence within the walls of the cave can be seen as labor. Prisoner workers need to spend more and more hours maintaining their profiles in a similar fashion to sex workers in the windows of red light districts. Digital identity labor is the forced labor of the 21st century. This creates an auto-disciplinary society where each anomaly and misbehavior is detected and quantified.
So this one, it's a bit dense, but I really like it. So this is one of the main question for me. So we saw this like triangle of relation between resource, labor, and the product. And here I'm like extending this idea of resource. So you know, like if we go back to this like Plato's cave. So at the end of this cave, on our back, there is this shadow. No, so we can think about like screen in front of us, and then there is this shadow, and this shadow, poetically, is a resource, and really it is, you know, because like every time we move or do things online, this kind of like we are creating this kind of new resource that is being extracted. So there is some kind of like thousands and thousands of different forms of like this kind of data collection or extraction machines. We can think about like, you know, cookies when we are browsing, or different kinds of sensors, or different, you know, GPS system, or like, and then those sensors can be like really small, as for example in Facebook we have this kind of invisible, I don't know, pixel, or it can be like planetary scale system, like, you know, satellites working together and tracking our movements, or it can be like infrastructure of mobile phone infrastructure, when we have this kind of like different types of extraction of whatever we do. And then for me it's like really important, like then understanding now this kind of like our position as a resource. So whatever we do, even if we move, we breathe, we click, we do whatever, we are basically creating some resource, no? That is being extracted from us. So in some sense, we even don't need to do anything anymore. We just need to exist. So if we live in this kind of total surveillance capitalism, our bare existence is basically labor that is creating this resource.
8. Platopticon. The gravity of these techno-giants hold billions of users, workers, products at the bottom of those caves. In this assemblage of allegories, millions of caves or prison cells form the unique and invisible panopticon structure. The central tower of this structure has two main functions: one, to project the content on the walls of the caves, and two, to surveil and capture the digital shadows of the prisoners reflected on the opposite wall.
So this one was like, you know, Platopticon. I really just needed to have that one, but I really like this idea of now thinking about these caves, but those caves are now in some kind of wider system and different between my panopticon and the other one. That this one, it's also like in the same time extracting and collecting data, you know, seeing, but also it's a part of this system of projection, because on the other side we have this kind of custom-made projection for all of us.
9. Information retrieval. From each cell cave and through the core of the panopticon tower, streams of information are flowing into one of the central structures of this image, the data bank. The data bank is not just the engine room, but the power itself. From here, we are examining three processes crucial for this story. On one side, extracted, stored and analyzed personal data is shaping the multidimensional portrait of the individual. On the second, all the products of the user's labor are being stored, analyzed and ranked to form the information spectacle of images, meanings, and reputations. Furthermore, in the third one, this structure lies upon the top of the exploitation of human minds, bodies and nature. 10. Creation of data body. Our online behavior is captured, processed, and deconstructed into statistical vectors, clusters, patterns, and anomalies. Each move we make is carefully analyzed by thousands of mathematical functions, algorithms, and machine learning systems. This system does not see us through linear narratives emerging from our browsing behavior, metadata, or movements in physical space, but as n-dimensional statistical projections. Each and every one of our clicks sharpens the resolution and complexity of this abstract and constantly changing statistical portrait or data body.
So here we are speaking about, okay, we are still there following basically what's going on with those like process of extraction. So our digital shadows are becoming a resource, and now we have two different stories. One story on the left side. From here it's basically creation of those like multi-dimensional portraits basically of us, because like there is so many different types of data being collected, but then at the end all of them are creating some kind of multi-dimensional portraits. And on the other side of the story we have like we are following this process of creation of projection of so what we are seeing, you know.
11. Individuals. These multidimensional data portraits of the individual, consisting of millions of data points in hundreds of dimensions, can be seen as what Deleuze will name individual. A physically embodied human subject that is endlessly divisible and reducible to data representations via the modern technologies of control. The critical art ensemble is describing this data body as the fascist sibling of the virtual body, a much more highly developed virtual form, and one that exists in complete service to the corporate and police state. 12. Condividuals. Individual is always open to interaction, always ready to be detached from, and attached to, other individuals that share some properties with it, creating collective agents as condividuals, or supersubjects. The mountains and valleys of multidimensional ever-changing invisible algorithmic landscapes are clustering individuals and creating new relations, taxonomies, and ontologies.
So this is also coming, so here we are speaking about this, you know, what is individual? Individual, it's our representation of those in those data banks. And then from my research on Facebook Algorithmic Factory, I was like really, interested in this situation, because like there we are not, it's all about like clustering. It's all about like connecting different data points together into some kind of algorithmic landscapes, So and basically our digital representations are somehow becoming part of these landscapes, and so this is, here I try to visualize that in with this like idea that within our bubbles, so those algorithmic and statistical landscapes are like moving those bubbles, and we are like being connected and disconnected and forming those condividuals that are some kind of like new abstract entities.
13. Surveillant assemblage. The full picture of our individual being is not centralized in one place but is spread across hundreds of data centers in the rhizomatic assemblage of the surveillance economy and government actors. This non-heterogeneous and dispersed assemblage portrait exists through the system of data dealers, the official and unofficial exchange of data, in constant flow forming one functional entity. 14. Content extraction. Each web page or other piece of content that is being captured in the wild is rendered and analyzed. This content is being extracted into hundreds of different signals. Collected content and extracted data become a permanent corporate resource for creating multidimensional, dynamic, complex topologies in which every piece of data becomes an object that is contextually linked to other objects. Within this map, this new meta-territory, crawl hundreds of different mathematical functions, algorithms, and neural networks that we can call instruments of measurement and perception. 15. Instruments of measurement and perception. Those instruments of measurement and perception always come with inbuilt aberrations. The shape of the algorithmic lenses is carefully crafted to project the image that is in accordance with the platform's financial interest and political goals and values. Platforms often imply direct rules and regulations. They have direct power of regulation of what can be seen or said, what kind of content can and cannot exist in their universe. Here we are visually representing those rules and regulations as filters. Similarly to the algorithmic lenses, the fabric of those filters is crafted according to the platform's financial interests and political goals and values. 16. Projection of the world. Instruments of measurement and perception are ranking and defining hierarchies and relations between content, users, and meaning. They define the digital regime of truth and order. This regime is a prism through which the world is projected in the form of the constant stream of spectacles on the walls of the caves.
So here we have some kind of like circle is basically made. So on one side we saw how basically all of those like this resource that is basically our behavior and everything is becoming some kind of multidimensional profile. On the other side, the things that we do is creating a content. In one moment, those two streams are joining together because like what those like our multidimensional portraits are basically influencing also what we are seeing. But at the end, what is like really important is this like process, the automatized process is something that is defining this kind of like order of things and designing so those platforms that are also being biased, that is represented with those like lenses, they are defining like what's first, what is second, what is possible, what is not possible, and at the end all of this is coming together into this kind of constant reality show that is like projected on the wall of our cave. And from here the story goes down, and now we are trying to understand this like materiality of all of those like processes. And this is related with like research with the anatomy of an AI system.
13. Engines of extraction. Empowered by the digital extractivism tools of the information age, everything becomes a potential frontier for expansion and extraction. From the depth of DNA code in every single cell of the human organism, to vast frontiers of human emotions, behavior and social relations, to nature as a whole, everything becomes the territory for the new extractivism. At this moment in the 21st century, we see a new form of extractivism that is well underway, one that reaches into the furthest corners of the biosphere and the deepest layers of human cognitive and affective being. 18. Enclosure and affinity to infinity. In the transition to the information age, capitalism was given a chance to satisfy its affinity for infinity, to form and conquer an infinite number of new territories, to create new mechanisms for the accumulation of capital within these new spaces and to formulate new forms of exploitation. Once the territory is invaded, the process of enclosure and exploitation is established. New forms of extractivism are expanding into the territories far behind the biodiversity and knowledge enclosure. This is why we are not speaking anymore just about the knowledge economy but about the attention economy, emotion economy, and many other new economies being born from the invasion of new territories of extraction. 19.
So what do we have here? It's also really important. This is this process of like, okay, the once they are able to find a way to extract new type of data, this is the moment in which like the new territory is being born, and this is coming with the process of enclosure. So for example, you find a way how to extract some data, and then you are basically putting the flag and commodifying this process of extraction. So we are seeing like different types of like like every few months the new territory is being invaded. So is it like our heartbeats, or is it like our dreams that are being like quantified, or is it our like whatever, like our emotions? So we are seeing like this kind of like emotion economy or attention economy. So every time when you hear like a new economy, it's basically another type of extraction of different types of data. But it's important to understand that this extraction process is going deeper and deeper into our conscious, subconscious, and from our body into deeper into our, like, let's say, minds. No?
Fractal supply chains. Supply chains hidden behind the engines of extractivism are black boxes as much as neural networks or algorithms hidden behind interfaces. Each triangle of this fractal represents one phase in the production process, from birth in a geological process, through life as a consumer product, and ultimately to death in an electronics dump. Within the fractal supply chain, we see a perpetual dance between human labor, non-human labor, earth labor, and automatization. 20. Blood, sweat, and toxic lakes. Every click or swipe we make online creates one little hole in the ground, filled with toxic waste and covered by toxic clouds. Every movement of materials and data within the planetary scale factory has its own hidden price. Supply chains are optimized towards maximizing profit for a few, while the real costs of the destruction that follows are shared among all the living entities on the planet in the present and the future. One molecule after another is extracted by labor and technique to make things for humans, but the waste products don't return so that the cycle can renew itself. 21. Triangular trade. Slavery was at the heart of the development of the modern planetary scale global economy. From those days, the same model of constant flow within the vast fractal production chains expanded in time, space, and complexity. The transatlantic slave trade evolved into the contemporary planetary scale factory. 22. Chains of digital colonialism. Traditional colonial practices of control over critical assets, trade routes, natural resources, and exploitation of human labor are still deeply embedded in the contemporary supply chains, logistics, and assembly lines of digital content.
So here we are seeing, so this is some kind of like, let's say, summary of all of those like extraction processes. So on one side we have like extraction of this kind of data behavioral surplus. On other side we have extraction of this like content production, but also from the bottom we have extraction of human labor, let's say like traditional forms of extraction of human labor and extraction of natural resources, and all of them together are basically shaping these like new chains of digital colonialism or new extractivism, however we can call that.
And infrastructure. In that sense, chains of digital colonialism are made both on the extraction of digital surplus and the traditional exploitation of labor and resources. The concepts presented are mostly represented here visually, in the form of allegories. Dictionaries define allegory as a story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one. All of these allegories and concepts together, joined in the form of an assemblage, create together a blueprint of a machine-like superstructure, or a super-allegory. In that sense, what we have here is an almost fractal allegorical structure, an allegory, within an allegory, within an allegory.
So, yeah, this was it. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it was not too much. I'm really looking forward to continue this discussion with you. Thank you. There's a joke here. Basically, I'm using this kind of like a list of stars. Basically, people that I'm quoting and that I'm using basically in this video and this work.
The sound at the end, during the end credits, wasn't really properly balanced, but we're going to ask Vladan before we start the interview maybe. Hi, Vladan, nice to have you here with us.
Hi.
I'm glad you made it. We enjoyed your video. We enjoyed the explanations you gave.
Thank you.
The last few words under the credits were not really audible. Maybe you just tell us what you shared with the audience, other than thanking them.
First of all, like really, I congratulate all of you who survived watching this for like 14 minutes. I think sometimes it's like too much. But so the joke at the end is basically related to this because I wrote like starring in the movie, and it's basically a list of references. Basically the list of people that I quoted or I kind of visualized in the movies. It's not so funny joke, but it's something.
Thanks. We're going to open up the floor to the audience. Maybe I'd like to break the ice with one question, and then we'll see what other questions are going to follow from people in the hall. Our curators, Eric Bunger and Florian Wust, describe technology as a totalizing system, and somehow looking at your assembly, I can say there's a totalizing system at work there. But then they continued explaining it as a system that is immunized against all failure and able to perpetuate itself ad infinitum. Would you also say that this is the case with this assembly, this machine, this system that you have introduced to us tonight?
Well, that's a really interesting question. I don't think this system doesn't fail. I think it's failing constantly, but in a way, like through this constant failure, it's existing and progressing into the future. And then we can also think about crises and tops and crises, and this kind of flow of crises and ups in capitalism. It's also part of capitalism. So the failure of this system that I also explained, it's also part of the system. And yeah, I don't know, for me, I try to visualize that system in many previous maps. So this is not the first one. So for example, in Anatomy of an AI System, I try to understand this extended anatomy of one device and to understand how this planetary scale system look like. And then I, for example, in Facebook algorithm factory, I zoom in into one factory, one process, and try to understand this like obscure process of algorithmic moderation or algorithmic creation of capital. So the thing is, like, what I would like to do is to surf through those different dimensions of that system and to try to understand how. I'm not so sure at the end that still like understand completely. And probably I'm in this position. It's really hard to understand those systems if you are, let's say, this kind of like position that you're not running one. I think it would be more easy for like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk to draw us how this like factor. But unfortunately, probably that's not there yet.
Thanks. We have a catch microphone here. I'm going to throw it in the audience whenever there's someone raising. Oh, Sky, you get it later, but I just want to throw it. Anyone with a question? Yeah, nice. There you go. I hope. Do you? Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me? Yes.
I can hear you, Vladan, also? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
It's not on. Oh, it is.
Okay. As an optimist, I'm going to ask you this question. Stephen Hawking said, if you fall into a black hole, don't be too worried. There is a way out. So my question is, can you escape the black hole?
Well, that's. I always had this, like, every time when I'm presenting my work, I always faced this question of like solution, and I'm always failing in trying to put myself into that. But in a way, I think maybe I mentioned this, like this kind of metaphor of I think it's called escaping velocity. It's kind of speed that you need to have in order to go out from the chains of that gravity. So, in a way, yes, there is probably a way to get out, but then the question is, like, if we follow this metaphor, like, can afford that amount of energy or resources to escape this gravity, and then we are again back into same question, and then we probably give some answer like again the same people are running those systems and they go to escape systems and create their own, you know, island somewhere far away to run away from whatever it's coming to bring their friends on Mars or whatever. You know? So it's for me there is always a way out, but then the question is like who is able and who have a privilege to do that. And I'm really always quoting this like situation when emails of this Clinton scandal with Hillary Clinton with emails, and then she was like. Someone asked, okay, but what's going on with Bill Clinton's emails? And then they said, like, Bill Clinton doesn't have an email. And so that's, for me, like, ultimate privilege, you know, like, who can afford not to have an email today, or, like, who can afford not to be part of that system, and who have a privilege to because all of us, we can you know, like leave those platforms or whatever, but then the question is like, what is the price for that? Like, can you find a job without like LinkedIn account, or can you know, be part of like social circles without like your Instagram account? And so there is always a price.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. Maybe an extension to this question. So you responded to, is there a way out? But what would disrupt this system? What could happen or would make this system go less smooth than you pictured it in your animation?
Well, what I'm seeing in, so for example, what is new compared to the time we were like doing anatomy of an AI system, for example, that were like kind of explaining all of those fractal supply chains. And back then, like in 2018, 17, 16, those fractal supply chains were like working perfectly. It was some kind of flow of metals and materials all over the globe, and it was like flawless chain of events that like at the end like materializing this like iPhone on your in your pocket. But now we are seeing like those supply chains collapsing, and that's interesting. That's something that I was like, for example, not expecting when we were like doing that research. So yeah, I think we are seeing we are getting into some kind of weird times in which like even those systems are starting to fail on a lot of different levels, and maybe that's a new opportunity, or maybe it will bring us to even weirder place. But I believe I always ask for me like what's like really interesting, how we really end up in this scenario, because like 20, 30 years ago it was kind of like, we were like promised something completely different. No? We were like promised some kind of like transformation of like humanity, everything, but we end up somehow in some kind of really weird scenario of this kind of surveillance capitalism, and like it's a weird scenario.
Let's see if there's more questions. Yeah. If you want, you could also introduce yourself, or just say who you are, and then ask your
I'm
question.
Denise.
Go ahead, Denise.
Yeah, I have a mic now. So my question is, I was wondering, maybe also a continuation of your question, Aryon. If we think about Web3 and decentralized web, in all this allegory of yours, and where do you think it falls? Because in your allegory of, for instance, Panopticon by Foucault, or if you think Althusser's hegemony and ideology, like this apparatuses, like it's all falls into this centralized point of view. Do you think like a Web3 is like a more democratized escape from that?
Well, to be honest, not so much, because like, unfortunately, I have two questions, two problems there, or minimum two problems there. First of all, like, so the new map and research that I'm doing for last 2 years is basically digging deep into histories and following some like genealogies of creation of those concepts and those like technologies. So, and then if we go back, like if we speak about this kind of like I don't know, crypto, whatever. For me, it's really like relating a lot to this kind of like invention. It basically started in mostly in your country, about like stock markets and tulips and all of those things together. That basically created this kind of speculative markets that we live today. And then if we follow that line, I see, like all of those things that's happening, for example, with NFTs and whatever, with some kind of there's some kind of, this kind of markets on steroids, like in creating the world in which everything becomes speculative market, like the pen, the gift, the whatever, now everything is expanding. And then if we combine this with this story with this one part of this movie that you saw, there is this kind of like ability of capitalism to expand into unlimited number of territories. And for example, this creation of like I don't know, NFTs or like Bitcoin or whatever, it's doing exactly that. It's creating new territories for speculation or whatever, you know. And I don't feel especially happy about that, you know, like as a person, you know, like for me, even the situation before, it was like too disturbing for myself, you know, like, and this is like, in a sense, too much. And then I'm thinking, like, if we really need to think about, like, what's the value, and how we to preserve the value, like why we should not think about, like, I don't know, garden as a ultimate value and compete between each other who will make a better garden and how our plants will be more healthy, than to bet on some kind of like something that pretend to be immaterial, but it's basically really material and burning some coal somewhere. So for me, like, I don't think that's a solution, you know, like, I think if we are searching for solution, the solution it's maybe in some relation with the nature and between us, and not in creation of some kind of new abstractions and even crazier markets and speculations and all of this.
Thanks. Maybe you go on to a next question. Raise your hand if you have one. If not, there's a on the first row.
Oh no, let's. I leave.
The cameraman is afraid his camera's gonna be. Just throw it.
No, maybe since I have it, I can ask something in continuation. Opportunistic question. Maybe in continuation of this line of thought of. What kind of allegories do we need to construct then to escape this? And I'm not asking it from a solutionist perspective or really naive, but we need to make allegories somehow that help.
I agree. I completely agree with that. And what kind of allegories? I don't know. That's maybe.
Well, you just gave one, the garden.
Find out, but we need to find, like, on one side, like, new ways of seeing and understanding. So being able to see behind those, like, layers of invisibility. So to be, to be able finally to understand the factory in which we are working. You know? To understand this kind of new forms of labor, new forms of relations that exist between us and those, like, invisible factories that are basically extracting, the data and everything out of us. And in the same time, once we know, then we also need to try to find the language to explain that in some way, in order to, because, like, what we are facing there, it's like some kind of, like, really complexities and a lot of different levels. And so from the supply chains are crazy complexities. The algorithmic processes are, like, crazy complexities. Hardware, it's a complex. Everything, it's, like, so complex and so not transparent. So in a way, but within this complexity, there is an answer. There is a key, and we should try to find a way how to speak about that, how to visualize that, how to create new forms of new allegories, new visual languages in order to explain those relations to ourselves and to others.
Maybe now we go to Florian. Still, the microphone has to come down. Yeah, there we go.
Thank you, Vladan, and thank you, because I think my question fits now even more. This resonated a lot with the panel we had before, Platform City, and there we had Sarah Kim participating from the Mapping the Unjust City collective in Stockholm. And she introduced her talk with, of course, explaining their practice of mapping and what mapping means to her. And she ended that part of her input by saying, it's not in a map we don't depict, but we want to enable through the process of mapping. So I would like to, because we talked now about all the, basically the content, but I would like you to talk a little bit about the form. So how you got to the maps, and you just spoke about the extreme complexities you're dealing with and trying to visualize, find little key elements in there that make us to see things better. And I think through your pictogrammic language in the map, you already do a lot of reduction in a way. So, but what happens then with the map? It could also be, I mean, there's lots of collective mapping projects or different perspectives, narratives going in there. So explain a little bit what is that, so to what extent it becomes a tool as well you are able or willing to share.
So I think, like, you know, when we speak about mapping and cartography, I always like to think first about this position that most of the time it's coming from the position of power. And then, you know, like the maps historically were like, this is my kingdom, this is the land I conquered, this is something that I own. No? So in most of the cases, historically, they're coming from like position of power. And then another important thing is to understand that maps are, even they pretend to be like neutral, they're never neutral, they're always, you know, somewhere in between the science and art and interpretation. It's always interpretation of the world. And being interpretation, it's full of biases, you know, like, so if you, for example, each map have its own, let's say, language, map language that exists within the map. And this language is basically defined. The language is basically classification of things that exist within the map. And every classification is reduction of reality. Every classification is wrong in some way. So we should see the maps as a form of, I'm seeing more maps as a form of storytelling than as a representation of truth. You know? And in that sense, for me, what I like to associate myself with is this idea of counter-cartography. Counter-cartography meaning like cartography coming from another position, so someone who is outside of this kind of like a black box and looking into the black box, or someone who is like trying to not, you know, like draw you my system, but try to understand the system of power from the outside, but it's never possible to be going outside, but never mind. In any way, so it's really powerful tool, but we should be aware that it's like always, it's full of bias, it's full of, you know, the maps are, you know, like each drawing on the map, it's a choice. And each shape is a choice. The line between two dots is a choice. So everything on the map is a choice. And being a choice, it's nothing else than the full bias of the person who did it. So like, we should be aware of the role of the cartographer as the one who is the ultimate, you know, like a storyteller and selling you its own like version of the world. And this is what I'm also doing, you know, like my maps are like, you know, they are like completely biased, and they are like, you know, clearly leaning to some political point of view or some ideological point of view. And, you know, like the map can be like really seductive, because they kind of like have this kind of petting that they are real representation of reality, but basically it's just storytelling.
Vladan, thanks a lot. I hope you have inspired people here to do some counter mapping, and let's become our own cartographers. Time's up, I'm sorry. It was great to be with you here. So far away, it felt very close nevertheless. Please a warm applause for Vladan Joler.
and I'm really, really sorry that I'm not able to be there. It was some kind of like a chain of crazy events.
We know to find you now. We'll see you soon in the Netherlands.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks again. We're going to announce maybe the next program coming up here. There might be a slide.